They thought you would never stop chasing. But the moment you went silent, they started to panic. Now they're afraid of losing the one who always stayed. And this time, you're not running back. Stay with me till the very end, because what you're about to realize will change how you see your silence and your power forever. Don't skip this message. The last part might be exactly what you need to hear right now. They thought you would chase forever. They thought no matter how cold they became, no matter how distant their replies, no matter how many times they pulled away without explanation, you would still be there trying, proving, convincing, overextending yourself just to keep a connection alive that they were slowly starving. They believed your loyalty was endless and your patience had no breaking point. They believed your love was a guarantee and not a privilege, and for a long time maybe that was true because you cared deeply. You saw potential, you saw what it could be instead of what it was, you fought for moments that were already fading, you defended someone who was slowly detaching, and you kept showing up even when your presence was barely acknowledged. But what they didn't understand is that even the most devoted heart reaches a moment of clarity. Even the most persistent soul gets tired of knocking on doors that are never fully opened, and the shift didn't happen loudly. It didn't come with dramatic words or a final confrontation. It happened quietly inside you when you realized that chasing someone who enjoys being chased is a game you can never truly win, because the more you pursue, the more they feel powerful, the more you explain your worth, the less they feel the need to recognize it, and when you finally stopped running after them, when you stopped sending that extra message, when you stopped being the first to fix every silence, something changed in the energy completely, because suddenly the dynamic they were comfortable with no longer existed, the safety net they relied on disappeared, and the version of you they thought would always be available began to fade, and that is when fear crept into their mind, not because you became cruel, not because you played games, but because you became still, and stillness is terrifying to someone who was used to your constant motion. Your absence began to speak louder than all your previous efforts. Your silence carried more weight than all your explanations ever did, and they started to feel the space you once filled so effortlessly. They started to wonder why you weren't reacting the same way, why you weren't trying to decode their mixed signals anymore, why you weren't fighting for crumbs of attention, and what scares them the most is not that you stopped loving, it's that you started loving yourself more. You began to understand that affection should be reciprocated, that effort should not feel like begging, that communication should not feel like interrogation, and when you withdrew your chase, you unknowingly held up a mirror to their behavior, and they saw the imbalance clearly for the first time because your pursuit was masking their indifference, your constant presence was covering up their inconsistency, and now that you've stepped back, the truth stands exposed. They are afraid because they no longer control the rhythm of the connection, they are afraid because they sense that you are no longer emotionally dependent on their validation. They are afraid because when someone who once tolerated distance suddenly becomes distant, it signals growth, and growth means you might not come back, and for someone who took comfort in knowing you would always circle back, that realization is deeply unsettling. They replay conversations wondering where the shift began, they analyze your shorter responses, your calm tone, your lack of urgency, and they feel the tension of uncertainty. Because they were never prepared for you to detach, they assumed your attachment was permanent, they underestimated your capacity to walk away, and now the balance of power has shifted without you even trying to shift it, because true power doesn't announce itself, it simply stops overextending, it stops negotiating for respect, it stops proving worth to those who refuse to see it. And the irony is that the moment you stop chasing is the moment they began to chase the feeling of being important to you. They began to test the waters, to send subtle messages, to appear unexpectedly, to remind you of shared memories, because they want reassurance that the door is still open. But this time you are not responding from fear of losing them, you are responding from clarity, and clarity changes everything. Clarity removes desperation, clarity removes anxiety, clarity removes the need to constantly secure someone's attention, and when you operate from clarity, your energy becomes grounded, stable, self-contained, and that stability makes them nervous because they can no longer predict your reactions, they can no longer trigger a response so easily, they can no longer rely on emotional intensity to keep you engaged, and the emotional leverage they once held quietly dissolves. They are afraid because they feel you slipping beyond their reach, not through anger but through indifference. And indifference is far more final than conflict. Arguments at least signal attachment. Chasing signals desire, but calm detachment signals resolution. It signals that you have accepted what is and decided to invest your energy elsewhere, and nothing unsettles someone more than realizing they may have lost access to someone who once prioritized them without hesitation. They thought you would chase forever because you always had before. They misread your consistency as weakness, your understanding as tolerance, your forgiveness as permission, and now that you have drawn an invisible boundary, they are confronted with a version of you that is no longer negotiating for crumbs, a version that understands that love should not feel like a competition for attention, a version that values peace over pursuit. And as you continue to move differently, speak differently, respond differently, they begin to feel the weight of what they may have taken for granted, because when someone stops chasing, it forces the other person to either step forward or lose the connection entirely, and that crossroads is uncomfortable for someone who was comfortable doing the bare minimum. Your withdrawal exposes whether their interest was genuine or simply fueled by your effort. And if it was genuine, they will rise to meet you, but if it was ego-driven, they will panic at the loss of validation, and that panic often shows up as sudden intensity, sudden curiosity, sudden attempts to reconnect, because they want to restore the old dynamic where they felt secure in your pursuit. But you are no longer operating from that place. You are no longer trying to win someone over who should have valued you naturally. You are no longer proving your loyalty through overexertion, and the shift inside you is subtle yet irreversible, because once you taste the peace of not chasing, once you feel the dignity of standing still and letting someone come to you, you realize how exhausting the old pattern truly was. And the fear they feel is not just about losing you, it is about losing control over a narrative they thought they understood. It is about facing the possibility that you have emotionally graduated from a cycle they were comfortable repeating, and whether they admit it or not, your silence forces introspection, your calm forces reflection, your distance forces accountability, and accountability is uncomfortable for someone who thrived on imbalance. So as you continue forward focusing on your growth, your purpose, your self-respect, you may notice their behavior shifting, their tone softening, their effort increasing, because they sense that access to you is no longer guaranteed, and access is valuable when it is scarce, and by simply choosing yourself, by simply refusing to chase what does not chase you back, you have transformed the entire dynamic without a single dramatic declaration. You have shown that your presence is a privilege, not a default setting. And whether they step up or step away is no longer your responsibility, because your role was never to convince someone of your worth. Your role was to recognize it within yourself first, and now that you do, now that you stand grounded in your value, the energy shifts permanently. They thought you would chase forever, but what they failed to realize is that the moment you stopped chasing was the moment you started rising, and rising changes everything, because when you rise, you no longer pursue what diminishes you, you attract what aligns with you. And that realization is both your freedom and their fear. And as this new dynamic continues to unfold, what unsettles them even more is the realization that your detachment is not temporary. It is not a tactic designed to provoke a reaction. It is not a silent protest waiting to be acknowledged. It is a genuine shift in your standards, and standards are not easily reversed once they are raised. Because when you finally understand that chasing someone who is unsure about you only creates more uncertainty inside yourself, something solid forms in your spirit, something that refuses to go back to emotional begging disguised as devotion, and they can sense that solidity now. They can feel that you are no longer swayed by breadcrumbs of attention or last-minute affection. They notice that you no longer light up at the bare minimum, that you no longer overanalyze every small gesture as proof of hidden love. And that awareness makes them deeply uncomfortable because it forces them to confront a truth they avoided for a long time, which is that they benefited from your insecurity more than your strength. They were comfortable when you doubted yourself because it made you easier to manage, easier to keep close without fully committing, easier to reassure just enough to prevent you from walking away. But now that you have reclaimed your emotional center, now that you are no longer reacting from fear of abandonment, the entire structure of the connection feels unstable to them. Because it was built on your pursuit, and without that pursuit the foundation shakes. They start to question whether they miscalculated, whether they pushed too far, whether they assumed too much about your tolerance, and regret begins to whisper in moments when they least expect it, in quiet nights when your name no longer appears on their screen, in social spaces where they notice your energy is not orbiting around them anymore, in conversations where they sense your focus has shifted to your own growth instead of their approval. And what truly unsettles them is that you seem peaceful, you seem composed, you seem unaffected in a way they never prepared for, because they believed your attachment to them was permanent. They believed they could always return and find you waiting in the same emotional position. But now there is uncertainty, now there is distance, now there is a version of you that does not revolve around their moods, and that uncertainty breeds fear. Not because you became cold, but because you became balanced, and balance is intimidating to someone who relied on imbalance to feel secure. They may attempt subtle strategies to regain the old rhythm. They might resurface with nostalgia, reminding you of moments when everything felt effortless. They might suddenly become attentive, asking questions they once ignored. They might even express vulnerability they previously withheld. And while some of these gestures may be sincere, you are no longer responding from desperation, you are evaluating from clarity. You are observing patterns instead of promises, you are measuring consistency instead of intensity, and that shift alone changes how they approach you, because they can sense that words alone will not move you anymore, that emotional spikes will not automatically reopen doors, that access to your energy now requires alignment rather than assumption. And deep down they are afraid because they realize they are now the one who has to prove something, they are the one who has to step forward. Consistently, they are the one who has to risk rejection, and for someone who is accustomed to being pursued, that vulnerability feels foreign and uncomfortable, yet it is the natural consequence of the balance correcting itself, because when one person stops overgiving, the other person is forced to either compensate or confront the emptiness, and in that confrontation lies their fear of losing someone who genuinely cared, fear of facing their own emotional avoidance, fear of admitting that they may have taken your presence for granted, and the longer you remain steady in your detachment, the more real that fear becomes, because time without your chase confirms that this is not a phase, it confirms that you have emotionally matured beyond the old cycle, and maturity cannot coexist with chasing someone who is unsure. Maturity demands reciprocity, effort, clarity, and emotional availability. And if they cannot meet you at that level, they sense that you will continue forward without them, not angrily, not dramatically, but decisively, and that quiet decisiveness is what unsettles them the most, because it signals finality without hostility, it signals growth without resentment, it signals that you have learned the lesson without needing to repeat it, and in that lesson you discovered that love should feel chosen, not chased, valued, not negotiated, mutual, not one-sided, and once you internalize that truth, there is no returning to the version of yourself who accepted less just to keep someone close. So as they watch you operate from this new space of self-assurance, they begin to understand that the era of effortless access is over, that your time, your attention, your emotional investment are no longer guaranteed, and whether they rise to meet your new standard or retreat into their ego is now their journey, not yours, because you have stepped out of the role of pursuer and into the role of chooser. And when you become the chooser, you no longer fear being left, you only fear betraying your own growth, and that is why they are afraid, because they sense that you will not betray yourself again just to maintain a connection that required you to shrink, and once someone realizes they can no longer rely on your endless pursuit, they are forced to face a question they avoided all along, which is whether they truly value you enough to chase back, and that question is powerful, because it shifts responsibility, it shifts effort, it shifts vulnerability onto their side, and as long as you remain grounded, calm, and aligned with your self-worth, the balance will never return to what it was before, because you have crossed a threshold internally that cannot be uncrossed. You have experienced the peace that comes from letting go of what does not fully choose you, and peace is addictive in the healthiest way. It reminds you that love should not feel like survival, that connection should not require constant pursuit, and that when someone truly fears losing you, they will show it through consistent action rather than comfortable complacency. And now the silence between you carries a different weight, not heavy with longing, but steady with possibility, because if they step forward genuinely, you will recognize it, and if they do not, you will continue rising without hesitation, and that is the ultimate transformation. They thought you would chase forever, but now they understand that you were never meant to chase at all, you were meant to walk beside someone who chose you just as intentionally as you once chose them, and realizing they might have lost that privilege is the very thing that keeps them awake, and as more time passes, what becomes undeniable is that your transformation was never about making them afraid, it was about freeing yourself from a pattern that quietly drained you, and that freedom carries a frequency they cannot ignore. Because when someone who once invested their whole heart suddenly begins investing in their own growth, their own peace, their own expansion, it shifts the emotional gravity of everything around them, and they feel that shift even if you never announce it. even if you never explain it, because energy always reveals what words try to hide, and your energy now says you are no longer waiting, no longer hoping they will finally become who you needed them to be, no longer shrinking your expectations to avoid losing them. And that realization unsettles them at a core level because they recognize that the safety of your unconditional pursuit is gone, and with it goes the comfort of knowing they could take their time, delay commitment, withhold clarity, and still have you orbiting their world, but now you have stepped into your own orbit, your own momentum, your own direction, and when you stop revolving around someone, they are forced to confront whether they were ever capable of standing still and meeting you halfway. And that confrontation is not easy, especially for someone who grew accustomed to being desired without having to fully show up, because now the silence between you is not charged with anxiety from your side, it is charged with reflection from theirs. They replay moments when you tried harder than they did, when you asked for reassurance and were met with vagueness, when you extended grace and received inconsistency, and slowly they begin to see the imbalance they once ignored, not because you argued about it endlessly, but because your absence exposes it clearly, and absence has a way of amplifying value that presence sometimes conceals, and in that amplification they begin to feel the weight of what they risked losing, because it is one thing to assume someone will always be there, it is another to realize they may not be anymore, and the uncertainty of that possibility shakes their confidence. They may question whether you found someone new, whether you emotionally moved on, whether you finally saw through the excuses. And while they may never voice these fears directly, their behavior often reveals it in subtle shifts, increased curiosity about your life, unexpected check-ins, attempts to re-establish familiarity, because they are searching for confirmation that they still matter to you in the same way, but what they sense instead is that you matter to yourself more now, and that is the difference, because when you prioritize yourself, you no longer respond from loneliness. You respond from alignment, you no longer entertain confusion, you require clarity, and you no longer chase potential, you invest in reality, and that evolution changes how they approach you entirely, because they realize that if they want to remain in your life, they must elevate, they must communicate directly, they must act consistently, they must offer stability where there was once ambiguity, and that demand for maturity feels intimidating to someone who thrived in emotional gray areas. Yet it is also an invitation to grow or to step aside, and that is where the real tension lies, because they understand that this version of you will not tolerate half-hearted effort, this version will not decode mixed signals, this version will not sacrifice self-respect for temporary affection, and knowing that forces them into a position they may have avoided their entire lives, the position of choosing fully or losing completely, and choice carries responsibility, and responsibility carries risk. And risk is frightening when you are no longer certain of the outcome, because before they were confident you would chase, confident you would forgive quickly, confident you would remain emotionally available no matter how they behaved, but now there is no such guarantee. Now there is the possibility that you might walk away peacefully and never look back, and that possibility humbles the ego in ways nothing else can, because it reveals that love is not something to be managed or controlled. It is something to be honored, and if it is mishandled long enough, it leaves, not with chaos, but with clarity, and your clarity is what makes them uneasy, because it reflects a strength they did not anticipate. It shows them that you were never weak for caring deeply, you were strong for loving sincerely, and now you are even stronger for loving yourself enough to stop chasing what does not chase you back, and as you continue building your life, pouring energy into your goals, nurturing friendships, exploring passions, embracing solitude without fear, they begin to see that your happiness is no longer tied to their validation, and that independence challenges the narrative they once believed about their importance in your world, because when someone realizes they are no longer the center of your emotional universe, they must either accept a new, healthier dynamic or confront their own insecurity about not being prioritized unconditionally, and that confrontation often manifests as fear disguised as pride, silence disguised as control, or sudden intensity disguised as realization. But beneath all of it lies a simple truth: they did not expect you to grow beyond the version of yourself that chased them, and now that you have, they are unsure where they stand, unsure how to regain what felt effortless before, unsure whether they waited too long to value what they had. And while you cannot control how they respond to this shift, you can control how you continue forward, and forward for you now means no longer bending to fit someone's indecision, no longer competing for attention, no longer investing in one-sided effort. It means standing firm in the understanding that mutual energy is the only energy worth sustaining. And whether they rise to meet you or fade into memory, your trajectory remains upward, because the true victory was never about making them afraid. It was about releasing yourself from the need to be chosen by someone who was unsure, and in doing so you chose yourself, and that self-choice is permanent. That self-choice rewires how you love, how you engage, how you respond, and once rewired, you cannot return to the old pattern without feeling the dissonance immediately. So if they decide to step forward, they will meet a different version of you, one who listens but also observes, one who cares but also requires reciprocity, one who is open but not desperate. And if they hesitate, if they remain in ego or indecision, they will slowly watch you become a memory they once assumed would always be available, and that is the final layer of their fear, the understanding that they may have underestimated someone who was quietly becoming stronger, someone who was quietly preparing to walk away with dignity instead of drama, someone who learned that chasing love often leads to exhaustion. But choosing yourself leads to empowerment, and empowerment changes the entire equation, because when you no longer chase, you no longer plead, you no longer wait for someone to validate your worth, you become the standard, and standards do not run after what fails to meet them, they simply remain where they are, allowing what aligns to approach, and realizing that you have become that grounded, self-assured presence is both your liberation and the reason they now feel the weight of what they almost lost, because they thought you would chase forever, but forever ended the moment you understood your value, and once value is understood, it is never negotiated again. And now, as everything settles into this new reality, the truth stands quietly but powerfully between you. They truly believed you would chase forever, they believed your love had no limit, your patience had no edge, your loyalty had no expiration. And because of that belief they became comfortable, they delayed, they withheld, they assumed, but what they never calculated was your awakening. They never imagined the day would come when you would wake up emotionally and realize that love should not feel like pursuit without partnership, that effort should not feel like pleading, that connection should not require you to constantly prove your worth, and when that realization anchored inside you, the chase ended naturally, not out of spite, not out of manipulation, but out of self-respect. and self-respect is silent yet unshakable. It does not beg to be seen, it simply changes your behavior, it changes what you tolerate, it changes how you respond, and now your energy speaks before your words ever do. It says you are no longer available for inconsistency, you are no longer impressed by temporary intensity, you are no longer afraid to lose what fails to choose you fully, and that is what truly unsettles them. Because for the first time they are unsure of their place in your life, for the first time they feel what you once felt, uncertainty, distance, the possibility of losing someone who genuinely cared, and whether they admit it or not, they recognize that if they want access to you now, they must rise, they must meet you with clarity, consistency, and courage, because the version of you that chased without limits no longer exists, and in its place stands someone grounded, someone centered, someone who understands that love is mutual or it is nothing, and so the story does not end with revenge, it does not end with dramatic confrontation, it ends with growth, with you standing firmly in your worth, moving forward without bitterness, open to something healthier, something balanced, something real, and if they choose to step forward with maturity, they will meet a stronger version of you, and if they do not, they will remain a lesson that taught you the power of walking away. Because in the end the greatest shift was never about making them afraid, it was about freeing yourself, and once you free yourself from the need to chase, you step into a life where you are no longer trying to be chosen, you are simply choosing what aligns, and that is how the cycle closes, not with noise, but with quiet, undeniable strength.